Chapter 8. The Mind. So, I have a position of view, or POV. How then does my POV interact with my body? The line hypothesis suggests that in all living entities, the hosting form has evolved to establish, maintain, and protect the delicate quantum state that is the position of view, or POV, from intrusion or specific violation. Failure of the host in this basic responsibility is the very definition of death. In this endeavor, the body and POV have co-evolved to have the POV as the target, the kernel of certain host-specific processes and functions. In any given instance of life, these functions establish one's presence and other evolved manifestations of the host, broadly describable as experiences. This interaction between the POV and the host form, sufficiently evolved, is the manifestation described in human cultures for generations, using one word or another, as the mind. The mind is one tier of implementation above the actual instantiation of the POV. While the POV will exist in every living entity, even in the absence of evolved systems that may manifest a recognizable mind, a mind cannot exist in the absence of the POV. The mind is the interaction of the POV with the living form. The mind functions as an antenna or a receiver for whatever workings and telemetry and other evolved manifestations of the host, such as it is capable of producing, that is to say, memory, consciousness, self-awareness, intelligence, thought, etc., or the lack thereof. The POV brings none of these features, but only that which may experience these features. The classically measurable implementation of the POV is as a standing quantum wave, established at the individual's unique QEF, one's unique values of the degrees of freedom, or DOF, of the QE spectrum. The POV is maintained by the entanglement molecules, or EM, within all cells, and in emerged species by the entanglement cells, or EC. Further, the physical host establishes a very real bond with the POV. This POV-host bond, or the POVH, is not unlike the standing waves shared between the valence shells of atoms, which establish and maintain covalent bonds that join molecules in this universe. It is the POVH bond which naturally provides the foundation of the mind, upon which the individual's first-person sense of presence may evolve in all living beings within you. The POV is implemented in biological hosts during gestation at the point where instantiation occurs in the growing host form by the EM and EC. However, in sufficiently evolved complex host forms, the mind is established when the nervous system, that is, the brain, form the unique infrastructure which may interface with the POV. This interface of the nervous system with the POV also takes the form of a standing quantum wave maintained by other specialized cells of the host, which maintains the coupling which describes the POVH bond between these two critical natural implementations. This joining provides the antenna state which becomes the basis for experience, which we call the mind. This temporary but crucial link lasts a lifetime and naturally manifests the collapsed reality as well as the possibility to evolve perception and experience for one living individual. Because the POVH bond is essentially a molecular bond, it also may be represented by a mathematical equation, or Hamiltonian. This Hamiltonian has its roots based on the Schrödinger wave equation. This is the quantum mechanical equation that very powerfully represents the complex standing probability waves of electrons in shells around atomic nuclei observed in atoms and molecules. However, this similarity will have very definite limits because, unlike molecules, the interactions and DOF that produce the POV are not derived exclusively from interactions between standard model entities, but between matter with metamatter. Metamatter is hypothesized to be a non-local particle that very weakly interacts in this space-time. Therefore, to formulate the proper wave equations for the POV, the DOF, which permits the EM within living cells to share a coherent quantum channel with metamatter, will have to be well defined through intensive research. This research will begin with the discovery of the EC and the EM. An apt analogy for the role of the POV within living hosts is to consider an individual in the middle of an atmospheric storm. A storm may take on many forms and have a number of features, such as winds, tornadoes, rain, snow, hail, lightning, thunder, clouds, etc., all described by certain degrees of freedom, temperature, pressure, humidity, surface absorption, and radiation coefficients, etc., which inform varying storm intensities. As a storm circumstantially manifests, it may be given various categorizations akin to species of the storm and may evolve to a form that may even be given a proper name, an identity. Consider if we placed a living being, a human being, for example, at the center of this imagined storm. This individual does not add to and takes nothing away from the storm's manifestations and activities. This individual does, however, bring, in the case of a human being, one individual's singular perspective within the storm. This individual has its own capabilities and functions which define it as such. Additionally, if this person has a communications device with an open channel, they may transfer information from within the storm to the outside world. This individual only very weakly interacts with the storm itself. This individual presents both a conduit and a target for information and experience from the storm, but in one direction only. Likewise, the instantiated POV bonded to a living host form is metaphorically similar to this, in that the POV brings no effect or affect of its own, but is essentially a teleportation channel bonded to a host, able to receive telemetry and imprint information manifested by its living host. This interaction, the POV-H bond in human beings, for example, which receives telemetry manifested by the human brain centered upon the individual POV, is the very definition of the mind. The mind can be described as being composed of two primary components, the POV and the rest. On Earth, the rest may be anything from not much at all, as in a single cell, to the complex workings of a fully functional complex nervous system and brain of the human host. Whether in a human, in an eagle, a mantis, or an octopus, the POV-H bond is the bond that builds upon the standing wave of the POV, which manifests the QE connection to metamatter in all life. Further, in sufficiently evolved forms, the POV-H bond becomes the mind. The description of the mind in various species is subject to cultural definition and perceptions, accurate or not, regarding a particular host form's observed behavior and nervous system function, or the lack thereof. However, to be accurate, any definition of the mind must include the QE connection and the POV as an essential prerequisite of individuality in any living presence in this space-time. As you look into the eyes of your newborn daughter and wonder, who are you? Who is in there? You, I expect, understand that every last atom that now and will ever compose her little body were each forged in a long expired star and has been here on Earth, for example, for billions of years, and in this solar system for even longer. The rational part of your thoughts understands that the property which uniquely instantiates her, here, now, cannot be those same anonymous atoms or molecules. Evidence, if they did, that would demand that conjoined siblings, sharing the same host form, the same body, composed of the same group of atoms and molecules and DNA, are one individual. However, we know empirically, inasmuch as any scientific evidence has ever validated anything, that this is not so. Conjoined siblings are in nature often two distinct, although not physically separate individuals. Not unlike two different isotopes of water poured into the same vase may seem to become one entity. Nonetheless, at the deepest levels in conjoined siblings, as in the vase of water, nature recognizes their distinction, their individuality. It is just a matter of understanding their fundamental, natural, eventually scientifically describable implementation. Although conjoined twins may share the same DNA and even the same host form, and thereby any number of organs, including at times portions of the same brain, they nonetheless are two distinct instances of life. No matter-based component or classically defined property of these anonymous atoms and molecules can assign this distinction. The line hypothesis suggests in such cases, such as conjoined twins, there are fundamentally two positions of view, or POVs, instantiated by two separate sets of entanglement cells which maintain two separate quantum coherent states at two unique QEF. Those QEF are, as is your daughter's QEF, immutable and indestructible. All QEF are a permanent fixture of the metaverse, or Hilbert space, currently hosted here on Earth. In conjoined siblings, the host form, the body, described and mediated by its local genetics, goes terribly wrong. In this situation, DNA exposes its severe limitations as the possible mechanism by which individuality is instantiated in living beings. If ever there was evidence of a claim, in this regard conjoined siblings qualify. The unique degrees of freedom, or DOF, of the entanglement spectrum, manifested by the hypothesized entanglement molecules contained within all cells and in the entanglement cells of every living host, is as abstracted from the existence of one's DNA and its anonymous atoms, molecules, and local evolutionary process as is the tuning of a radio or TV channel abstracted from the anonymous polymers, rare earth molecules, manufacturing process, and general physical designs of your radio or TV set. It is hypothesized that upon the successful separation of conjoined siblings, if you were then so situated as to empirically compare, with both sufficient resolution and understanding, their DNA currently believed to define each sibling's individuality, you will discover no classically identifiable difference between the now separate host forms. Further, for a time the siblings will remain genetically 100% identical. This is because the body, in the case of conjoined siblings, as in all living beings, does not establish individuality whether genetically diverse or identical down to the deepest recesses of their DNA. Therefore, genetic sequence, A, T, C, G, etc., must be empirically ruled out as the most fundamental defining feature of individuality. The individual that is your daughter, or my daughter, indeed all life, is instantiated in their respective habitats by virtue of natural laws and circumstances. You and her other parent donated local evolutionary genetic information, as does trillions of other hosts in and perhaps beyond Earth's ecosystem, to create a new living form of its kind evolved to host individual life. More significantly, your daughter donated her own uniquely tuned metamatter, tuned via her QEF's lifetimes of past instantiations in Earth's ecosystem. This enables the establishment of her unique natural teleportation, her line channel. This is a shared coherent state established between metamatter with her gestating entanglement cells some 11 days into human gestation. This natural entanglement is established at her unique QEF to establish her position of view, or POV. This standing quantum wave, once bonded to her new human host, establishes a new POV host bond, the POVH. The POVH bond is the antenna state that establishes the mind of the individual that you will come to know as your daughter. With this POVH bond to a human form, all things human become possible. However, her specific features, her capacities, depend entirely on the specifics of her particular growing host form. Not only her physicality, but her sentience, consciousness, self-awareness, cognition, creativity, joy, sorrow, or the lack thereof, all will manifest from her new host form and its path through life. This occurred and can reoccur because reoccurrence is scientifically observed to be the way of nature in all things. It is only the collection of anonymous atoms and molecules that will necessarily establish a new facade as they come and go even now as you watch her grow into what is essentially a new form, an adult. Certainly a true joy to observe, but don't let the visuals confuse your understanding, unless of course you want it to. The details of this implementation may be unfamiliar. Nonetheless, like the deep details of genetic science today, such details do not know, nor have they ever required our understanding or acceptance to nonetheless define individual life throughout this universe.